Good morning. Well, it's morning. Might not be morning when you're watching this, but whatever time of the day it is, happy day to you. We are going to be jumping in today to argument. And what is argument? So we're going to lay it out. We're going to talk about what argument is and what argument is not, according to its true definition. We will also be reading Bullet in the Brain by Tobias Wolff. And then you will be diving off into a series of discussion questions regarding that short story. So without further ado, we're going to get started. So share screen. This is going to take just a moment to pull up. And let's get in a slideshow mode. All right. My screen a little bit bigger. And I'm just about ready. Are you guys ready? All right. Here we go. All right. What is argument? We've got a lot to go through here. You can see the cat and my husband having an argument. Oh, that made me giggle. That was real funny. Had to share. All right. What is argument? According to the textbook answer is this. Our book is about arguing in a positive sense, in a calm, courteous process where you identify a subject of current or possible debate, analyze why you view the subject the way that you do, address others who may not share your view, and try to persuade them that your view is worth accepting or at least makes sense. So this is according to the textbook, Arguing About Literature, the book that you may or may not have at this point. But this is what it is identified argument as. Anywhere in there has it said yelling or fighting or, cussing or hitting or any of those things? No. A true argument contains none of those things. We identify the subject of debate, analyze why we view it the way that we do. That's a huge part of true argument, is asking yourself questions. Why do I believe this way? And addressing others who may not share your view. Addressing, not yelling at, not screaming at, addressing, talking to, sharing ideas with, conversation, trying to persuade them that your view is worth accepting or at least makes sense. None of this kind of activity. That's not argument. That's being a bully. So we want to, in an argument, a true argument, try to persuade that our view is worth accepting or at least listening to. Nowhere in there does it say when. No. Just the goal is to get your voice heard. Doesn't mean they have to change their minds. It's just being able to air your opinion and listen to the opposing side as well. It's a back and forth process. And we have to understand that argument, true argument, is everywhere. We are participating in it already. You're already participating in it. You just don't realize it. And so the textbook gives us a few ideas here. Coaxing friends who dread horror films into joining you at Saw 12. You know how to convince your friends to go do something with you if they're not necessarily into the idea. You know how to persuade them, right? That's some true argument skill, because you know your friends, and so you know exactly what to say in order to get them to go do what you want. That's argument. Explain the logic of your stand on climate change. Advocate for social causes. Petition your city to launch recycling sites. Convince a pal that Whataburger rocks. I added that one. That one wasn't in the textbook. I do love a Whataburger burger. I also love a Whataburger chicken sandwich. I also love the banana pudding shake, which is available right now because I'm recording this in the summertime. delicious. But anyway, moving on. See, I just made an argument for the banana pudding shake it. Whataburger. Argument, according to our textbook, is an alternative to war. Wouldn't it be nice if our politicians actually used true argument in their repertoire of behaviors? True argument is to argue or to disagree, to air views that not all may hold. It is not a contest that you try to win by insisting that you are right. If that's what you're aiming for, then you are fighting. You're not participating in true argument. Ideally, it is a form of inquiry, a process by which you test your beliefs, consider others' views, and stay open to changing your mind. That's true argument. Test your beliefs. Again, it starts with you. Why do you believe what you believe? And does your opinion have adequate evidence to support it? Number two, consider other views. What are the other perspectives? Understand why they exist. Why do people have them? Be honest about these things and stay open to changing your mind. Not that you need to waver on your convictions, but maybe just be open to the fact that it's okay for there to be other perspectives other than your own. It's okay for people to believe the way that they choose to believe. Generally, that's based on our backgrounds and where we're coming from, our culture, our environment, our experiences. I know people, as they age, they tend to have experiences that will alter their thought processes. It happens as we grow. So argument is a growth process. We're questioning ourselves, we're questioning others, and we're staying open to new ideas, open to potentially changing our minds. It's not about attacking critics, but it is about noting similarities. You want to know how to get your foot in the door in establishing a strong argument with someone else? Establish some similarities first. Find some common ground. Once you find common ground, you've noted that you are alike in some way, then it is easier to begin to discuss the areas in which you are different. My favorite story with this is I have two daughters, and they are 2 years apart in age. They are currently 26 and 23. The youngest one will be 24 soon. So when they were 16 and 14-ish, I'm cooking in the kitchen. They come in the kitchen, they're fighting, and they're yelling at each other, and they're mad, and they're both trying to get me on their side. Mom, blah, 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 blah. Mom, blah, 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 blah. And I had enough. And I literally, that's the correct use of the word literally, I literally went, that's it. Neither one of you is loving your neighbor as yourself. I'm out. It was great because in that moment, they both looked at me like, right? And they had a common enemy. Once I was established as the common enemy, the fight stopped. That was hilarious. It's still one of my favorite parenting moments. I'm so done. I was just done with both of them. That's it. Neither one of you is loving your neighbor as yourself. Mom out. But they established a common enemy. Therefore, they had common ground. Therefore, the fight stopped. And all of a sudden, they were cool with each other again. And they left my kitchen, and I was able to finish doing what I was doing. Win for everyone. So moving on. I love this visual argument down here at the bottom because arguments can be visual as well. I think that's a pretty strong argument. No words needed. All right, to continue it as an alternative to war, treat other positions fairly and adjust your own thinking as necessary. Be willing to admit that other positions exist. Like we talked about in the last video, there are 8 billion people on this planet, and we all have had different experiences. We all have different levels of education. Therefore, it is going to be very rare that we actually all ever align into one way of thinking. It's not going to happen. So you want to treat other positions fairly, accept the fact that it's okay for other ideas to exist other than your own. Recognize the limits of your knowledge and understanding. You may think that you know everything there is to know about your topic, but certainly don't be so cocky as to think you know everything. There's always more to learn, and we need to stay open to knowledge and open to understanding. Admit your inner conflicts, how your thoughts are divided, your values conflict, and your feelings are mixed. Try some honesty about your perspectives. Do you have some conflicted feelings? It's okay to admit that. It's okay to dive into that. It's okay to ask yourself questions. It's actually really good. It's actually makes you stronger. It causes you to get out and to look for more information and to back yourself up more. The real argument is always inside of yourself. It always begins inside of you. You need to know that you know that you know before you proceed into argument. My husband tells me, or he told me one time not too awful long ago, he says, wow, you just really don't participate in conflict, do you, unless you have all your ducks in a row? I said, no, I don't. I'm not going to go into that space with you unless I know that I know what I'm bringing to the table. And unless I know that I know what you're bringing to the table too, so that we're prepared for an appropriate conversation, an appropriate argument. It should teach you about yourself and what you still need to learn. A true argument. So, some expectations. And again, this is from the textbook. In class and in life, expect disagreements. They are going to happen every day. In fact, often they are going to happen. These are crucial to learning. That's how we grow. It's how we learn. We need to be challenged with new ideas. And so we have to step up our game. We must be challenged in order to grow. And we must listen and critically think. This class is going to be so much about how do we think critically and what do we need to add to our repertoire of thought processes in order to achieve this critical thinking. You must accept that argument is everywhere and you will be participating in it. Are you participating in it effectively, or are you kind of falling on your face? So we're going to be diving into all of these spaces. I love the fact that argument is an art also. I think this picture doesn't even need to say your words have power, use them wisely. I don't even think they needed to write that on there, did they? You get the idea. That breaks my heart. How about this one? It's an argument. What does it say? What is the artist sharing with you? I'm just going to leave it there. Your words have the power to hurt, to heal, open minds, open hearts, and change the world. Never forget the responsibility that you have over the words that you speak. Don't forget that words have power. The words that come out of your mouth have the power to heal and the power to hurt. They have power to open minds, open hearts, and change the world. Most often, aren't we just running around using our words for selfish means to get what we want, not thinking about others? Use a railroad over people. Words have power. Argument is art. It's not just in art. True argument is art, because you have to be introspective and then express yourself, understand your audience. There's so many aspects of this that need to come together in order for it to be true argument, that it is art. Jerry Spence has written books on how to participate in argument, how to win in an argument. And again, I'm telling you, it's not about winning, but some people in the business world especially, they're going to teach these techniques so that you can be successful. They call that winning. Depends on what type of success you're aiming for, is my thought on that. But the art of arguing is the art of living. We argue because we must, because life amends it, because in the end, life itself is but an argument. Why are you here? The argument of your life. Why are you here? What is your purpose? We want to craft our argument with rhetoric. Now, rhetoric in the Greek means writing, speech, and visual images used for a certain purpose to affect how people think and act, to aim to shape beliefs and conduct. So we want to affect, not change, affect how people think and act, to aim to shape beliefs and conduct. We have a goal. We have a goal to cause the audience to think and reflect. That's a good goal. It's a strong goal. It's not up to you to change their minds. It's up to you to give them information that they can take and consider. And we will use persuasive means to do so. We're going to talk about that quite a bit. I love this cartoon. The king says to the prince, "Don't worry too much about math, science, or history. Just make sure you get good marks in rhetoric." Know how to argue. Know how to influence people. Right? Golf clap. We will consider the rhetorical situation always. What's our topic? Who's our audience? And by what means do we share our ideas? That's your channels. So we want to start in these areas. What's the topic? Who's our audience? And by what means do we share our ideas? Continuing on with the textbook, the elements of argument. And at this point, I put this little guy because I feel like it's right. You get to this point in the lecture, you're just like, oh, get to what I have to do. I know you. I know what you're thinking. Just tell me what I need to do so I can do the work and move on, right? I get it. We need to lay some groundwork here. So, when you argue, you attempt to persuade an audience to accept your claims regarding an issue. To achieve the same, you present evidence, explain your reasoning, rely on assumptions, and make other kinds of appeals. All right, it's said. We can move on. Some strategies for analyzing an argument. Number one, identify all of the argument's basic elements. Number two, map the argument's path. Where is it going? Is it organized? Number three, identify the values the argument honors: morality, realism, shared sacrifice, family, bonds of responsibility, prudence, seriousness. What is the core value in that argument? And number four, identify words in the argument that can have more than one definition. Well, you have to understand that English is hard. And there are many people in this country who don't have English as their first language now. So we need to be aware that our language is screwy. And we have many words that have more than one definition. We have many words that we use multiple ways. We have the same sound of word spelled in a variety of ways. It's got to be confusing to someone who does not hold English as their first language. It gets confusing for those of us who do have English as their first language. Let's be honest. Y'all don't know how to use there, and there. I know, I grade papers. Your, whatever. I don't know. Y'all don't know. I don't either. That's not true. I do know how to use them correctly. And I will mark off on your papers when you don't. So we need to be aware that we have limitations in these areas, right? And understand that other people do as well. And so when you are using particular words in your argument, you want to make sure that you're giving them definition if you need to make sure your audience understands them. For instance, if you're using the word organ, you want to make sure that your audience understands what you mean by organ. It can mean a musical instrument, similar to a piano, except it makes amazing sounds, or it could be a part of the body that performs a specialized job. So we need to understand that words can have more than one meaning. So all of that's from the textbook, everything that I just shared from the textbook, Arguing About Literature. Now we're going to jump into some argue-ness. And I'm saying ness because I absolutely love that movie, You, Me, and Dupree. I don't know if you've seen it. It's your fake homework. You should watch You, Me, and Dupree. At the end of it, Owen Wilson's character, he determines that he's going to be a motivational speaker, and he's talking about finding your nest, figuring out what makes you you, and embracing it to find your success. And I love it. I used to have a t-shirt that says "Find Your Nest," and I lost it somewhere. I don't know where it is. And I used to, back when the movie was fairly new, I would have students fill out a paper that it was called Find Your Nest, and everybody had to put down 25 things that make you unique. You know, how do you figure out who you are? What's your nest? And so we're going to talk about some argue-ness, some additional information about argument that I think makes this a lot more clear and attainable. It's actually information that I drew from a former textbook that I used to teach with. So we'll get to that here in just a second. But first, your words matter. I found this picture and I had to share it because I just feel like it's absolutely beautiful. If the words that you spoke appeared on your skin, would you still be beautiful? Think about that for a moment. If the words that come out of your mouth appeared on your skin, would you be beautiful? I love that. Words, so powerful. They can crush a heart or heal it. They can shame a soul or liberate it. They can shatter dreams or energize them. They can obstruct connection or invite it. They can create defenses or melt them. We have to use words wisely. Yes, I'm all about using words wisely. I'm careful with the language that I choose to use. I know where I am. I understand my surroundings. I reserve bad words for appropriate situations. Think about it. You know people. I'm sure you're not one, but you know people who go around cussing all the time. So whether they're happy, calm, angry, sad, they're cussing. And so when they need to make a point and they're cussing, do you really take them any more strongly than normal because they always cuss? See, always cussing and always using those words takes away their power. Now, I understand this. And so for me, I use bad words, cuss words, whatever we want to call them. They're only bad because we've labeled them so. But I use them very rarely. And when I do, they have power. The people in my circles know that if one of those words come out of my mouth, I mean it. I mean business. And heads will go and turn. Words have power. If you know that, if you understand that, words can have power too. But then also, when you are speaking angry words at people, those hit home and those hit deep. And we need to remember they're like arrows into people and who they are. Words have a magical power. They can either bring the greatest happiness or the deepest despair. And that was from Freud. Some more. Raise your words, not your voice. It's the rain that grows flowers, not thunder. And that's where I drew the theme of this semester from, is this quote from Rumi. Raise your words, not your voice. Rain grows flowers, not thunder. No, I love that. I think that's absolutely amazing. And then words are free. It's how you use them that may cost you. Words have no power to impress the mind without the exquisite horror of their reality. Edgar Allan Poe. That's another beautiful quote. So here we go. The following information is from a former textbook that I used when I was teaching in a trade school environment. And it was interesting to me because most of my students were from, and most of them had not graduated from high school. Most of them got their GEDs. Many of them were there because their parole officers said either go to school or go to jail. And they were electrical students, HVAC students, welding students, medical assisting, and a variety of others. We had quite a few options in our trade school. And so they would come to me in an English class and they would all have an attitude like, why do I got to take an English class? This is stupid, right? And, some of you may feel the same way. I get it. That's why I want to teach my class differently. And I taught that class differently, even though I was given a textbook and told this is the textbook you use to teach this class. That book was so over the top. It was so over the capacity of the students that I had. It was written for like an upper university level student. And I had to figure out how to take the language in the book and make it work for the environment in which I was teaching. When, like I said, most of my students didn't finish high school and had gotten GEDs so they could go back to school. And so I had to figure out how to take that information. And as I'm studying that book, I'm like falling in love with this idea of argument, and I'm understanding it, and I'm digging in, I'm getting it, and it was changing me as a person. So what I did is I drew all of the information that I knew was applicable to my students, and I created lessons from it. What you see here on the screen would be a part of what was their final exam. And so I broke the information down and made it accessible. And so I like to take this part because it's so ingrained in me now after having taught it for years. It's so ingrained in me that I want to share these same ideas with you because I feel like personally this helps us understand a little bit more about argument. And so we're going to go through these. I think there's like 4 slides of this, and you're like, but there's blanks, right? So you have to listen to me to get the answers. And some of these will be questions on your exam. So you're going to need to pay attention and you're going to need to listen as I go through these. So we are surrounded on all sides by what type of issues? Argumentative. We are surrounded on all sides by argumentative issues. One of the most important things that you need to remember about argument is it does not imply anger. Anger is not involved in true argument. Once anger gets involved, it is no longer a true argument. It's done. It's over. That's not true argument anymore. Once emotion really comes into it, you might as well go, okay, let's stop before it gets stupid, because you know that it does. Once you get angry, things stop making sense. And then you forget what you were talking about in the first place. I know this from experience in my past life. So we have to understand that true argument, in order to be effective, does not contain anger or strong emotion. Therefore, what is the difference between an argument and a quarrel? Well, a quarrel is a fight, and a fight is angry. An argument is not angry. An argument is a conversation, a debate, back and forth exchange of ideas. An argument is a process of rational inquiry. Rational, meaning logic-based, not emotion, rational. The goal of the community of writers and readers is to find the best solution to the problems or issues under discussion. We should always be looking for the best solutions for everyone that's involved. Oftentimes that's compromise. How can we find the best solutions so that we can bring everyone to the table? It involves truth seeking as well as persuasion. So we are after truth by means of persuasion without letting anger get the best of us. Whether or not the other individual changes their mind or not, that's not up to you. That's not your concern. That's for them. You simply are airing your truth and let it go. Psychologist Carl Rogers calls the believing game empathetic listening. So the textbook talks a lot about reading to believe and reading to doubt. And reading to believe is basically empathetic listening. So the believing game, right? Empathetic listening, meaning you are able to listen to the other side with an open heart, open understanding, not shutting them down, but you are willing to hear them out. Empathetic listening, that's part of the game of believing in an argument, reading to believe or listening to believe. We want to recognize that it's okay for the opposing side to have their own opinion, and you should hear them out. So, and then there's reading to doubt or listening to doubt. And the idea with that is be a skeptic. Be a skeptic. Be open, but be a skeptic. I need more evidence. I need more to help me understand. Don't just believe every argument that comes at you. Be a skeptic. So the answer there in that blank, though, with Carl Rogers is empathetic listening. Explain why free writing can help you write an argument. Well, we haven't discussed this yet, so I'll go ahead and talk about it now. We will discuss this when we get to a conversation on outlining. But free writing is when you sit down with your topic and you just write out everything that you already know about it. What's already in your head. We don't always know what's already in our heads, so we just need to sit down and we need to just word vomit. Put the words on paper. Okay, and that will help you write an argument because you're actually going to dig into your brain and discover what it is that you already believe and get that information out and put it on paper and then look at it and you go, whoa, okay. I either knew more than I thought I did or, ooh, I don't know as much as I thought I did. So you're going to learn a lot about yourself by free writing. Why is writing a summary a good way to read an argument to believe? Well, when you read an argument, or you listen to an argument, a great way to understand or to know what you actually understand is to write a summary of what you heard. That's just a strong way to determine if you are actually well involved in that argument. Can you write a summary of what you've heard? Now, how often is this how a fight starts. Isn't it interesting that if three would just walk around and look at things from four's perspective, he would see that even though he's right on his side, four has a different perspective, and four has a right to see it the way that he does. And when you look at it from four's perspective, you go, "Oh, I get what you're saying." How often is life just like that? A lot. I was going to say often, and then I was going to say a lot, and so it kind of merged together there. So when you read as a doubter, you question the writer's logic, the writer's values, and the writer's evidence for developing their argument. So logic, values, and evidence. That's when you're being a skeptic. You want to question the logic, question the values, question the evidence. Maybe not like verbally out loud, or do verbally out loud. It just kind of depends on you and the situation, as long as it's not going to escalate and become a fight. Because at that point, you need to just walk away. There's no point. Nobody's listening anymore. And you know that. Think about that. When emotion gets involved into your discussion, is anybody listening anymore? Mm-mm. We're not listening when someone's yelling at you. You're not listening to them. You're formulating your comeback. You're not participating in actually what they're having to say. It's really interesting when you sit back when you're listening to other people fight, because you realize nothing is getting accomplished except a giant waste of time. And that's just sad. For me, no thanks. Don't plan on spending my life like that at all. I will talk. We can have conversation. If you can't have conversation, I will walk away. It's not worth the energy. You're not going to hear me. I don't want to hear you because you're disrespecting my desire to have a calm, courteous conversation. So we're done. And that's the way it goes. So critical thinking incorporates both reading to believe, being open, and reading to doubt, being skeptical. To what purpose? Well, we need to be open to the opposing perspectives, but we also need to be skeptical. We need proof. We don't want to be gullible. We don't want to just accept ideas without digging into their validity. So you're protecting yourself. You need evidence, strong evidence, not evidence that's flimsy or from Wikipedia or from the Star magazine in the grocery store line. Don't just take things at face value that you read on the internet, even on our big news sites anymore. You need to do some digging and some reading and some research before you just go, really? And believe. When you make an argument, you want to keep someone in mind. Your audience. Always keep your audience in mind. In argumentation, you set out to cause your reader to think, not to acquiesce to your opinion, not to give up. You want your reader to think, your audience to think. That's all. You want them to consider your opinion. That's it. Then walk away. Let them do with it what they will. Unwillingness to accept any assumption. So if you are unwilling to listen, this makes an argument impossible. Absolutely impossible. Kind of a waste of time again. Understanding a new field requires us to learn a new vocabulary. Sometimes we have to learn new things in order to successfully participate in argument, in order to successfully navigate a conversation with another person that you're wanting to share ideas with. You're going to have to perhaps learn some new information so that you can have an encounter with that individual. So sometimes it requires us to learn a new vocabulary. Now, here's my favorite one. Whenever you ask, whether a given piece of writing is persuasive, the immediate rejoinder should always be persuasive to whom? Is this persuasive? Who are you trying to persuade? Just because you formulate an argument that's persuasive to person A does not mean it will be persuasive to person B or C. So, who is it intended for? That tells you if it's persuasive. Because if you intended to sway person B, you didn't. So the argument was not persuasive. Now, in considering person A, yes, your argument was persuasive. So you need to know your audience. Who are you trying to persuade? That determines whether or not your argument is persuasive. You might think you crafted this amazing piece of argument, but you didn't consider an audience whatsoever. It's not a persuasive argument. You have to know your audience. You have to know who you're persuading. You have to use language they'll hear. You have to keep them in mind. You have to address their perspectives. You have to include their opinions in order for them to be with you in that argument. So whenever you ask whether a given piece of writing is persuasive, the immediate rejoinder, which is a fancy word for response, should always be persuasive to whom? Who are you trying to persuade? That's the ticket. I love that. That's so cool. Here's another one of those fancy dancy little drawings for us that show if 6 would just walk around and look at things from 9's perspective, everything would change. How often are we fighting like that? How often do we step into a fight because our argument escalated? When if we would just put down our pride and be open and consider the opposing perspective, you might learn some new things. Doesn't mean you have to change your opinion, but it will strengthen your opinion if you understand the opposing perspective and you learn better how to address it. Good stuff. Now, I have no idea if Tom Hardy actually said this or not. I'm sure that somebody just took this quote and stuck it on a picture of Tom Hardy. I really have no idea. But I didn't mind the picture of Tom Hardy, so I thought, well, I'm going to throw it in the PowerPoint. But it's a good quote. It's good information. So let's read this. Before you argue with someone, ask yourself, is that person mature enough to grasp the concept of different perspectives? Because if not, there absolutely is no point. Before you argue with someone, ask yourself, are they mature enough to grasp the concept of more than one perspective? If not, don't even engage. Unless you just enjoy fighting for the sake of fighting. There are some people out there that are just fighters and they just like to jump into conflict because why not? It's something to do. That's not high on my list of values. That's just me. Maybe it is for you. So you've got to figure out where your line is, but you also have to consider, your place in business, your place in life, and how people view you. Is that something that's valuable to you, or is that something you don't care about? You have to make that determination for you. Personally, for me, I agree with this quote 110%, because if they cannot grasp that there can be multiple perspectives, then there's no point in the conversation for me. So moving on. Warning. Now, some facts about people in life, in business, in families, in friendships, in relationships. We do have 2 camps of people. We have people with low emotional intelligence and we have people with high emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is far more important than your intelligence quotient, your IQ. Many businesses are hiring now based upon emotional intelligence. Will you have a good personality? Do you get along well with people? Can you participate in teamwork? Are you a lone ranger? Are you a me first individual? Many businesses are wanting high emotional intelligent people because then they can have a strong working environment, a comfortable working environment that people get along and stay. They have longevity because we know how to work together even when we have disagreements. Those are high emotional intelligence people. Low emotional intelligence people are out for themselves. And I mean, that's just the way that it is. You can look up, there's so much research on this, so much. You can find videos on emotional intelligence all over YouTube, psychologists, psychiatrists talking about these ideas, business leaders talking about these ideas. And many companies are now hiring based on your ability to access the right side column and attributes of your character. This can be learned. And so if you are recognizing yourself on the left column and you were going, eek, I want to be more like this is something that you can become intentional in training yourself to be more on the high emotional intelligence side so that you're finding yourself with stronger ability to participate in true argument and sustainability in the workplace. So I'm just going to read through these attributes real quick. But on the low emotional intelligence side, aggressive, demanding, egotistical, bossy, confrontational, easily distracted, glib, selfish, poor listener, impulsive, resistant to change, passive, unresponsive, slow, stubborn, critical, picky, fussy, hard to please, perfectionistic. Now, attributes of high emotional intelligence. These individuals are assertive, ambitious, driven, strong-willed, decisive, warm, enthusiastic, sociable, charming, persuasive, patient, stable, predictable, consistent, a good listener, detailed, careful, meticulous, systematic, and neat. Look up the information for yourself. I'm going to share an article with you at some point this semester that's called Hire for Attitude. And it is put together, it is an interview by Dan Schwabel at Forbes with Mark Murphy, who is a leadership training guru, who has written many books and worked with many Fortune 500 companies. And in his article, he talks about how they tracked 20,000 new hires over a period of 2 years. At the end of that 2 years, 46% of that 20,000 was no longer employed. Half of those people were no longer employed. And what they discovered was 89% of those that were no longer employed, it was because of a lack of emotional intelligence. They had bad attitudes. They got themselves in a wad. I almost said, but they got worked up. They either quit or they were fired because of low emotional intelligence. It's a good article. Highly recommend. But like I said, there's lots of information out there on the internet that backs this up. This is not just me coming up with this idea. This is factual information. So we move on and we jump back into information that I want to share. We always want to choose data from sources that we think our readers will trust. That's important when you are writing an essay. You want to choose sites that you know your professor's going to be good with. Don't get Wikipedia and quote from Wikipedia because every single one of us is going to say no. But the same is true when you are participating in argument with individuals. Use data from sources they'll trust. Our way of seeing the world is shaped by our values and beliefs, just like every other person. The way that you see the world is shaped by your upbringing and your experiences, just like everybody else. You're no different. You might think you're different because you're you, but you're no different. Everybody's values and beliefs are shaped. They're all formed by something, and their experience is different than yours. So we have to know that. An argument is more persuasive if the audience trusts the speaker. You have to establish a level of trust with your audience before you can expect them to listen to you or anything that you have to say. So an argument is much more persuasive if the audience trusts the speaker. That's why in the first week of class, I try to be open about who I am. Now, because this is an online video, I didn't dive in as deep as I would do in an in-person class in that. Being honest, just didn't want that necessarily in an online video that can go round and round and round. But it's very important for your listeners to trust you. So you need to be open. You need to give them reasons to trust you. Arguers create pathetic appeals. Now, don't be thinking that means awful appeals. Pathetic in this sense means the true base of the root word pathos is emotion. So arguers create emotional appeals when they connect their claim to the reader's values. You know what your reader values? Connect to it. You tell a story that makes them emotional. You share some statistical data that makes them emotional. You need to know something about them so you'll know what touches them. Use it. Is that manipulative? I mean, if you want to use that word, let's just call it persuasive. That would be a euphemism for manipulative. It's totally fine. It's a technique. Appeals to pathos or emotion become illegitimate or false when they confuse the issue. So when you're using details that are intended to cause an emotional response, you need to be very careful that you're being clear with those details so that it doesn't get confusing for your reader. Using concrete language means to use specific details. If you are describing something, you need to think about it from a reader's perspective. What do they need you to describe in order to be with you? Describe it in exactly that way. Using narrative language means inviting the reader to relive your experience with her as you read her argument. So we want to use narrative language. We want to write like we speak. Invite the reader in. Come sit down, have a coffee with me. Let's talk about an issue, right? Where do you stand? Here's where I stand. Make it a narrative. You must identify not only your audience's resistance to your ideas, but the reasons for their resistance, not just the fact that they disagree with you. You need to know why they disagree with you. When you know why they disagree with you, then you can address the why. Until you can address the why, you're not going to get very far. They're just going to be like, no. Well, why no? Dig in, dive in, go to those places. You need to know the reasons they disagree. Always ask why. Why is an excellent word. All right, some more here. Considering words, metaphors, and analogies, if you want to create positive feelings regarding a recent city council decision, you would call it bold and decisive. If you want to create negative feelings, you can call it haughty and autocratic. Words are amazing. There are some words in certain contexts that have very positive meanings, and in other contexts, that same word can have a very negative impact. So you want to be thinking about your word choices. Do they come across as positive or do they come across as negative? Sometimes it's going to mean that you have to have your argument reviewed by a peer reviewer prior to your audience so that you can know that your words are coming across in the tone that you intend. Your tone is important. Did you know that tone is 38% of communication? Whether it's written or spoken, 38% of communication is tone. Do you ever stop and think about your tone? How often are you thinking about the way you come across? How do you sound? Do you sound angry? We're not thinking about that. 38% of communication is tone. 55% is nonverbal, well, as the body language aspect. So you've got 55 plus 38 is 93. 93% of communication is nonverbal. 55% is body language, 38% is tone. 7%, only 7, is the words we write and the words we say. Which do you focus on more? Right? The words. And we don't even do that well. So we really need to start thinking, and we need to start looking into ourselves, looking at our arguments, asking ourselves, are these arguments strong? Looking at our audience, knowing some information about our audience's perspectives. Does our information align with what that audience will trust? And we want to use appropriate tone. I love this. It's so fun. In participating in a classical argument, an arguer must sometimes concede to an opposing argument rather than refuting it. Sometimes it is better to just say, okay, I understand that we have different viewpoints and it's okay. We can just leave it there. It's fine. Or you can say, you know what? I see your perspective. I see what you're saying. I get it. And I understand why you believe what you believe. Okay, I'm good. Sometimes it's better. You don't have to go, oh, you win. That's not what conceding means here. Sometimes it's better just to let the argument stop rather than, yeah, because you recognize it's about to get emotional. It's about to go to a level where it's no longer an argument and it becomes a fight. Now, and maybe you enjoy a good fight. Well, by all means, push it. If you're like me and you know that's a waste of time, well, for me, it's a waste of time. I'm going to let it go. So the next question there is conceding to opposing views a bad thing in an argument? And I'm going to say no, it is not. I think sometimes it's wise if you're trying to establish trust with this individual. Go ahead, let them know, hey, I understand what you're saying. I see where you're coming from. Then you can walk away, take some time, build your argument back up, maybe reintroduce the conversation at another time. I mean, why not, right? But it's about establishing trust. We want to establish trust and credibility, our ethos in the argument. We want to always make sure that in a written argument that we are choosing a layout that avoids confusion. We want to be visually pleasing. And so that means we need to make sure we're adding a lot of white space into our arguments. Give your audience an opportunity to breathe. Give them some white space. In a visual argument, the use of color can move readers emotionally and imaginatively. Don't know if you've ever done a color study, but look up the psychology of color. Go down that rabbit hole. It's really fun. And then you'll start to look at business logos and notice the colors that they use. And you're going to be like, I get it. I understand why they'd use that, right? There is psychology in color schemes. And so there are many times that color is being used to influence you, and you might not realize it. But it's also something that you can use to be influential if you know about it. In creating visual arguments, you have to determine, here we go again, What is persuasive to whom? Know your audience. If you don't know your audience, you're not going to end up being persuasive. All right, now you're like, wow, what does this mean, right? In the old textbook, there was a section in one of the chapters that was talking about how we need to look at argument as if it were an old stage lamp. So years ago, when productions were put on stages, and today we have, technology, and we have it's techniques. I don't know what it's called, lighting, they can do the lasers and all of that. Years ago, all they had was a lamp that had a color wheel in front of it. And they would turn the crank and the color wheel would change. And so that's how we would set mood on the stage, was turn the color wheel, it changes the color, and it had the 3 primary colors on it, like red, yellow, and blue. And so you would turn the wheel. And if you want to create like a warm feeling on the stage, like it's summer day or bright happiness, perhaps you would put the color wheel on yellow. So you're casting a yellow light onto the stage. Perhaps you needing it to feel like night. You want it to have like a little bit of a dark aura. So you put it somewhere between red and blue, right? And so you create purple on the stage. Argument is the same way. You have your argument. That's your stage lamp. But you still have to turn the wheel. You have to crank and change the color depending on who you're trying to influence. Who's in the audience that has going to be seeing and viewing and hearing and participating? You're going to have to change the mood, change the tone, change the lighting of your argument so that your audience will get your message. I thought that was a beautiful analogy, and so I like to put it into the lecture. Something to think about, something to let it kind of sit in your head and ruminate, if you will. So thank you, LeVar Burton. The goal is critical thinking. Anybody recognize him? I mean, obviously you can't spit it out right now, but to me, this is Geordi LaForge. To so many of my students, they go, it's the Reading Rainbow guy. I know, right? He's Geordi LaForge from Star Trek Next Generation to me. But whatever. Thank you, Reading Rainbow guy, Geordi LaForge. Yes, the goal is critical thinking. All right, now let the stories begin. So we talked so much about argument. We're going to be participating in some arguments from this point forward. All right, we're going to be reading. I am sorry. Something's getting me in here. Oh. We're going to be reading several arguments over this next semester. Not next semester, this semester. We're going to be encountering arguments. We're going to be reading some short stories and some articles. And inside all of those, there are arguments, and we're going to dive into them. We're going to ask the question why. We're going to dig into who is the author. We're going to dig into why did they believe what they believed. And we're going to look at the different elements inside of their writing and pull out the evidence and the proofs. And so we can then draw our own conclusions and determine the impact upon ourselves. Very excited to be walking through this critical thinking process with you for the next few weeks. I'm excited. So it's time for the stories to begin. Our first one is Bullet in the Brain by Tobias Wolff. This is a wonderful story. I have the words here on the PowerPoint screen, and so you can follow along. But also, the words are in a PDF document uploaded onto Blackboard, I believe. Now that I'm saying that, I'm questioning myself, but it should be there. It should be there. So you can follow along that way if you would like. I might not go through and read the story every single time, but I am going to go ahead and read this one today. Bullet in the Brain by Tobias Wolff. I do have to put my glasses back on for this. So, I am going to minimize my screen just a little bit so I can see all the words. Here we go. The line was endless. Anders couldn't get to the bank until just before it closed, and now he was stuck behind two women whose loud, stupid conversation put him into a murderous temper. He was never in the best of tempers anyway. Anders, a book critic known for the weary, elegant savagery with which he dispatched almost everything he reviewed. With the line still doubled around the rope, one of the tellers stuck a position close sign in her window and walked to the back of the bank, where she leaned against a desk and began to pass the time with a man shuffling papers. The women in front of Anders broke off their conversation and watched the teller with hatred. "Oh, that's nice," one of them said. She turned to Anders and added, confident of his accord, "One of those little human touches that keeps us coming back." Anders had conceived his own towering hatred of the teller, but he immediately turned it on the presumptuous crybaby in front of him. "Damned unfair," he said. "Tragic, really. If they're not chopping off the wrong leg or bombing your ancestral village, they're closing their positions." She stood her ground. "I didn't say it was tragic," she said. "I just think it's a pretty lousy way to treat your customers." "Unforgivable," said Anders. "Heaven will take note." She sucked in her cheeks, but stared past him and said nothing. Anders saw that the other woman, her friend, was looking in the same direction. And then the tellers stopped what they were doing, and the customers slowly turned, and silence came over the bank. Two men wearing black ski masks and blue business suits were standing to the side of the door. One of them had a pistol pressed against the guard's neck. The guard's eyes were closed and his lips were moving. The other man had a sawed-off shotgun. "Keep your big mouth shut," the man with the pistol said, though no one had spoken a word. "One of you tellers hits the alarm, you're all dead meat. Got it?" The tellers nodded. "Oh, bravo," Anders said. "Dead meat." He turned to the woman in front of him. "Great script, eh? The stern brass-knuckled poetry of the dangerous classes." She looked at him with drowning eyes. The man with the shotgun pushed the guard to his knees. He handed the shotgun to his partner and yanked the guard's wrists up behind his back and locked them together with a pair of handcuffs. He then toppled him onto the floor with a kick between the shoulder blades. He took his shotgun back and went over to the security gate at the end of the counter. He was short and heavy and moved with peculiar slowness, even torpor. "Buzz him in," his partner said. The man with the shotgun sauntered along the line of tellers, handing each of them a hefty bag. When he came to the empty position, he looked over at the man with the pistol, and who said, "Whose slot is that?" Anders watched the teller. She put her hand to her throat and turned to the man she'd been talking to. He nodded. "Mine," she said. "Then get your ugly ass in gear and fill that bag." "There you go," Anders said to the woman in front of him. "Justice is done." "Hey, bright boy, did I tell you could talk?" "No," Anders said. "Then shut your trap." "Did you hear that?" Anders said. "Bright boy, right out of The Killers." "Please be quiet," the woman said. "Hey, you deaf or what?" The man with the pistol walked over to Anders. He poked the weapon into Anders' gut. "You think I'm playing games?" "No," Anders said. But the barrel tickled like a stiff finger, and he had to fight back the titters. He did this by making himself stare into the man's eyes, which were clearly visible behind the holes in the mask, pale blue and Raleigh red-rimmed. The man's left eyelid kept twitching. He breathed out a piercing ammoniac smell that shocked Anders more than anything that had happened, and he was beginning to develop a sense of unease when the man prodded him with a pistol. "You like me, bright boy?" he said. "You want to suck my dick?" "No," Anders said. "Then stop looking at me." Anders fixed his gaze on the man's shiny wingtip shoes. "Not down there, up here." He stuck the pistol under Anders' chin and pushed it upward until Anders was looking at the ceiling. Anders had never paid much attention to that part of the bank. a pompous old building with marble floors and counters and pillars and gilt scrollwork over the tellers' cages. The domed ceiling had been decorated with mythological figures whose fleshy toga-draped ugliness Anders had taken in at a glance many years earlier and afterward declined to notice. Now he had no choice but to scrutinize the painter's work. It was worse than he remembered, and all of it executed with the utmost gravity. The artist had a few tricks up his sleeve and used them again and again. A certain rosy blush on the underside of the clouds, a coy backward glance on the faces of the cupids and fawns. The ceiling was crowded with various dramas, but the one that caught Anders' eye was Zeus and Europa, portrayed in this rendition as a bull ogling a cow from behind a haystack. To make the cow sexy, the painter had canted her hips suggestively and given her long, droopy eyelashes, through which she gazed back at the bull with sultry welcome. The bull wore a smirk, and his eyebrows were arched. If there'd been a bubble coming out of his mouth, it would have said, "Hubba, hubba." "What's so funny, bright boy?" "Nothing." "You think I'm comical? You think I'm some kind of clown?" "No." "You think you can F with me?" "No." "F with me again, your history. Capiche?" Anders burst out laughing. He covered his mouth with both hands and said, I'm sorry, then snorted helplessly through his fingers and said, "Capiche, oh God, capiche." And at that, the man with the pistol raised it and shot Anders right in the head. The bullet smashed Anders' skull and plowed through his brain and exited right behind his right ear, shattering shards of bone into the cerebral cortex, the corpus callosum, back toward the basal ganglia and down into the thalamus. But before all of this occurred, the first appearance of the bullet into the cerebrum set off a crackling chain of ion transports and neurotransmissions. Because of their peculiar origin, these traced a peculiar pattern, flukishly calling to life a summer afternoon some 40 years past and long since lost to memory. After striking the cranium, the bullet was moving at 900 feet per second, a pathetically sluggish glacial pace compared to the synaptic lightning that flashed around it. Once in the brain, that is, the bullet came under the mediation of brain time, which gave Anders plenty of leisure to contemplate the scene that, in a phrase he would have abhorred, passed before his eyes. It is worth noting what Anders did not remember, given what he did remember. He did not remember his first lover, Sherry, or what he had most madly loved about her before it came to irritate him, her unembarrassed carnality, and especially the cordial way she had with his unit, which she called Mr. Mole. As in, uh-oh, looks like Mr. Mole wants to play, and let's hide Mr. Mole. Anders did not remember his wife, whom he had also loved before she exhausted him with her predictability, or his daughter, now a sullen professor of economics at Dartmouth. He did not remember standing just outside his daughter's door as she lectured her bear about his naughtiness and described the truly appalling punishments that Paws would receive unless he changed his ways. He did not remember a single line of the hundreds of poems he had committed to memory in his youth so that he could give himself the shivers at will, not "Silent upon a Picandarian," or "My God, I heard this day," or "All my pretty ones, did you say all? Oh, hell tight. All?" None of these did he remember, not one. Anders did not remember his dying mother saying of his father, "I should have stabbed him in his sleep." He did not remember Professor Josephs telling his class how the Spartans had released Athenian prisoners from their mines if they could recite Aeschylus, and then reciting Aeschylus himself right there in the Greek. Anders did not remember how his eyes had burned at those sounds. He did not remember the surprise of seeing a college classmate's name on the jacket of a novel not long after they graduated, or the respect he had felt after reading the book. He did not remember the pleasure of giving respect. Nor did Anders remember seeing a woman leap to her death from the building opposite his own just days after his daughter was born. He did not remember shouting, "Lord have mercy!" He did not remember deliberately crashing his father's car into a tree, or having his ribs kicked in by 3 policemen at an anti-war rally, or waking himself up with laughter. He did not remember when he began to regard the heap of books on his desk with boredom and dread, or when he grew angry at writers for writing them. He did not remember when everything began to remind him of something else. This is what he remembered: heat, a baseball field, yellow grass, the whir of insects, himself leaning against a tree as the boys of the neighborhood gathered for a pickup game. The captains, precociously large boys named Burns and Darsh, argued the relative genius of Mantle and Mays. They've been worrying this subject all summer, and it has become tedious to Anders, an oppression, like the heat. Then the last two boys arrive, Coyle and a cousin of his from Mississippi. Anders has never met Coyle's cousin before and will never see him again. He says hi with the rest, but takes no further notice of him until they've chosen sides. And Darsh asks the cousin what position he wants to play. "Shortstop," the boy says. "Short's the best position they is." Anders turns and looks at him. He wants to hear Coyle's cousin repeat what he's just said, but he knows better than to ask. The others will think he's being a jerk, ragging the kid for his grammar. But that isn't it. Not at all. It's that Anders is strangely roused, elated for those final two words, their pure unexpectedness and their music. He takes the field in a trance, repeating them to himself. The bullet is already in the brain. It won't be outrun forever or charmed to a halt, but in the end it will do its work and leave the troubled skull behind, dragging its comet tail of memory and hope and talent and love into the marble hall of commerce. That can't be helped. But for now, Anders can still make time. Time for the shadows to lengthen on the grass. Time for the tethered dog to bark at the flying ball. Time for the boy in right field to smack his sweat-blackened mitt and softly chant, "They is, they is, they is." There's a link down at the bottom, also to the New Yorker magazine, where you can find this story. But that, my friends, was Bullet in the Brain by Tobias Wolff. Now, these are the questions that you are going to answer, and it's the same set of questions that we will be using for the rest of the semester. With each piece that we read, you will answer this same set of questions. The first question is, what are your thoughts, and what is your emotional response? So you're going to write, and this worksheet is on Blackboard. You don't need to copy it off of here. You go to Blackboard, the worksheet is there for you. So first thing you do is consider, what is your emotional response? Now, I think actually the Blackboard question sheet has 2 extra questions, so you need to make sure you answer all of those. But this is the basic gist of what we're doing. Second question is, what's the historical situational context of the story? So first of all, you need to look up, when was it written? And then you want to look at what's happening in the world at the time it was written. What was happening in Tobias Wolff's life at the time that this was written? Number 3, what are 3 things, events, or ideas about the author's life that could have impacted the writing of this story? You want to research. You're going to have to do some research on Tobias Wolff. What are some things that happened to him in his life? I really should require you put down 5 or 7 things about his life so you get a really clear picture here of who he is as a person. If we were in the classroom together, I would have everybody do this all at one time, and we're like popcorn sharing ideas about Tobias Wolff. But you really need to dig into his life and learn some things about him, like the fact that his parents divorced when he was small, and his dad took his brother, while Tobias was raised by his mother. So they were raised apart. He was in the Vietnam War, and that had significant impact on him. He's also been a book critic. Hint, hint, wink, wink. He's a professor. Lots of interesting things you can learn about him, like the fact that he writes himself into all of his characters. Hint, hint, wink, wink. So perhaps Anders is Tobias Wolff, but you have to read about Tobias Wolff in order to find out that information. Then you can go to number 4. What do you think is the author's intended meaning? Why did he write this? Well, sometimes on the internet, you can actually find where the author says, here's why I wrote this. Why not find that? Look for it. See if you can discover it. And then we're going to take a deep look into the piece. What are some literary elements that back up the aim? You're going to have to find 5 literary elements that Tobias Wolff used to write this story. So you can talk about characters, setting, conflict. There are different types of conflict. That could be 3. You could talk about personification of the bulls, the bull and the cow. You could talk about a lot of different things. Irony. You talk about flashback, but 5 different literary elements. And you're like, but I don't know about literary elements. Hey, guess what? On Blackboard under handouts, there's a huge 15-page list of literary elements with definitions. You're welcome. I'm giving you everything you need. It's all there for you. You just have to use your tools. Then the next one. How do the rhetorical elements, logos, pathos, and ethos back up the aim? So where's the logic in the story? Give examples. Where's the ethos in the story? The credibility? Just examples. It could be the fact that Tobias Wolff, book critic himself, Anders, main character, book critic. Interesting. I'm not trying to give you answers. But you need to look up, determine what you think is the ethos. It could be just inside the character. Maybe the character says something about, I am this, or I am that, or one of the characters says something where there's some credibility established. And then pathos. Pathos is anything that the author has done to evoke an emotional response in you. I mean, just the sheer fact that the bullet goes into his brain, you're not expecting that. You're hoping that it doesn't happen before it happens. And so, have that moment. But then you get to the end. Oh, it's so beautiful. They is. So beautiful. So, lots of different things that you can talk about inside this piece. Do you believe the author was effective? That's another question you're going to answer. So, based on your own understanding of this short story and its impact on the world, was it effective? And then the last question is, does it impact you? How does it impact you? And give an explanation. All right. So these are the questions that you're going to be jumping into every single week. These worksheets will also be useful for you when it comes to writing the essays for this class. You'll be able to use the worksheets as part of your resources or your reference materials. You will need to learn, use Citation Machine, how to cite those in your works cited page and inside the document text of your essays. So just know that moving forward. Now, I gave you some information in the PowerPoint about Tobias Wolff. This was all found just from a simple internet search. I'm going to read through it right now. You can read through it for yourself. I also included back here, and I'm not going to play it right now, but this is a video of Bullet in the Brain that somebody put together. It's a short movie that was made of the short story. So your homework. It does have a reading on here. I did not include the readings in your course schedule, so you can ignore that part. Unless you really would like to read those chapters in the textbook, you feel free. Go right ahead. There's no quiz on them. Complete the Blackboard questions regarding a bullet in the brain. That will be your homework for this week of class. Now, we're going to stop the share. Okay. I am going to take a look quickly because I just want to be sure that I'm telling you the right thing. Yes, homework is just the bullet in the brain questions. Okay. So just to verify, just to make sure. So thank you for being with me through this entire video lecture. I hope that you have a super wonderful rest of your week. If you do have any questions, you know that all you need to do is text me and I will get back to you as quickly as possible. Thank you very much, and I hope you all have a wonderful, fantastic week.